if you're around and you work hard and you do a good job, it's amazing how magically those opportunities somehow present themselves to you once you're there.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook presented by Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 13, and today's guest is TV and radio sports personality Bob Wischusen. Before we get started, a quick thank you, as always, to Max Brandstetter of the Wild Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@hippodirect.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and today's guest is Bob Wischusen. Bob has been the radio play-by-play voice for the New York Jets since 2002. And since he joined ESPN in 2005, he's been a television play-by-play voice for some of ESPN's college basketball and football broadcasts. Bob, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
First, let me thank you for getting off the golf course and joining me today.
No problem.
I have to admit that I'm a bit nervous interviewing a media personality.
Oh, God, please.
This is your business, but, it's obviously a hobby for me. But we're recording today, May 11th, in the midst of the coronavirus and you being a sports guy. Maybe you have a crystal ball. What are you thinking we're going to be seeing anytime in the near term here related to sports?
Yeah, all I can say is what I'm hoping we'll see, and that is rapidly expanded testing and the ability to get to the point where you can test athletes and teams with the same frequency, if not more so you test everybody else. I don't know, short of waiting for, therapies or vaccines, that there's any other way to do it. The MMA stuff that happened over the weekend, and seemingly successfully so, probably a good sign. The PGA Tour, NASCAR, things like that are going to get started. So hopefully that creates a little bit of a blueprint here for what the other leagues can do.
Yeah, I think so. It's really incredible, being a big sports fan and having a lot of friends that are sports fans. It's really incredible. We know how important sports can be, but not having it, and certainly there's, tons of people suffering with jobs and all, but, certainly sports has been an opportunity for people to take their mind off of issues that they have, and not having that as a go-to has made this even more significantly a problem.
Yeah, and it's a $30 billion industry. We shouldn't forget that either. It's the candy store. That's why I got into it. I love it for that reason. It's not real life. It's fun. But the people that right now that don't think it's a candy store, that don't think it's fun, are the people that operate bars and restaurants that, butt right up against stadiums. The stadium workers themselves, the vendors, the people that sell the food, the people that sell the souvenirs, the people that, take the tickets, and the security guys, and all the hotels that run their businesses in and around stadiums, all the people whose jobs are, based on running like lacrosse tournaments, little league tournaments, soccer tournaments, youth sports. There's a huge segment of the population that owes a big portion, if not all, of what they do to sports running as a business, like any other business. So, yeah, there's a very practical need to get it back too, so that people can go back to work and earn a living. And, besides the fact that we just need the distraction, it's the number one way that a lot of us, escape real life and do something fun. And right now, we're just looking for anything that we can concentrate on and talk about that isn't this disease.
Yeah, that's the truth. I was reading an article in the Daily News today, and they had a whole story about the vendors around Yankee Stadium and the bar owners, and it hit exactly the points that you just talked about. So, hopefully, I know Major League Baseball was supposedly doing something with their owners today, and hopefully they'll be able to come up with something that'll be safe for the players and all the people associated with the sport. So we shall see. Let's take a step back. You're a Jersey guy, right?
I am.
talk about growing up in New Jersey. I know you went to Union Catholic. Give us, what was it like in the Wischusen house?
It was kind of standard middle class, living in the suburbs of New York City. Growing up, I'm the oldest of four kids, and so always something going on. And playing sports, playing in the backyard, playing in the front yard, playing in the schoolyard, and my love of sports was kind of natural. I grew up in kind of a child of the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And it was a fun time to be a New York sports fan and, close enough to New York, being in Union County, where, everybody around us considers ourselves part of the New York metropolitan area. So, you've got 9 pro sports teams here. It wasn't hard to find things to watch on TV or listen to on the radio. And, kind of grew up a sports fan in the shadow of New York City.
What was what were your teams? What are your teams? You mentioned 9 professional sports teams, all local. Are you guys?
Yeah, the only teams, it's funny, my dad was not a crazy sports fan. So I didn't grow up in one of those households where I had a dad who was like a lunatic, Giant fan, and I had to pick the Giants and hate everybody else, or a dad who was a lunatic Mets fan, so I had to hate the Yankees. We were football fans, we were baseball fans. And when I was growing up, the Yankees and Mets never played each other. The Giants and Jets rarely, if ever, played each other. And most years, if not all 4 of them were bad, at least 3 of the 4 were bad. So it wasn't like you had to sit here and worry about like the Giants and Jets meeting in the Super Bowl or the Yankees and Mets meeting in the World Series. Now, as I got older, I gravitated towards teams. I was always a Rangers fan. I always picked one hockey team. You could not be a Ranger and Islander and Devil fan because they all played in the same division. They played each other, and there were real rivalries. You couldn't be a Knicks Nets fan. They played against each other in the same division. But it was like, with the Giants and Jets and Yankees and Mets, not only being in different divisions, but different conferences, different leagues altogether in baseball. So I kind of rooted for both teams when I was a little kid. Nobody told me I wasn't supposed to. But now I'm Mets, Jets, Knicks, Rangers. Like those are kind of my core 4 pro teams. So
yeah, that's kind of the
what
standard.
Towards.
Yeah, that's kind of the standard, I guess. Mets, Jets, Knicks, Rangers. I was a little bit of an oddball, and because in many ways I'm a Giants fan, and Mets and Knicks and Rangers. And it's funny you talk about your upbringing. Mine was a bit different. My dad was an old Brooklyn Dodgers fan, and when the Dodgers left Brooklyn, he could not root for the Yankees.
Sure.
And he kind of just waited around until the Mets showed up and became a super Mets fan, and as did I and my son now. So we've had lots of pain, but it's still always loved going out to the old Shea and now to City. So you grow up in Union County, you go to Union Catholic High School, and then you go off to Boston College. How did you choose Boston College?
I don't know. It was a good school, like you're 17, 18 years old. You have no idea what you're doing. And they kind of told you going from a Catholic high school, these are the good schools. Okay, great. So I went to Boston College. The benefit of going there was it was in a big city and it had a really good student radio station. And so I joined up with that as soon as I got there. And being near a big city, it gives you internship opportunities. So, the guys that go to Syracuse obviously have a big leg up on the rest of us that want to get into this business based on the fact that they're at like kind of the school and the program at the school to go to. We didn't have a fragment or a fraction of the program at BC that they have at Syracuse. But the advantage that we had being at BC was you're in Boston. You're in a top 5, top 6 media market, and you have the ability to do a lot of internships. And so I did a couple there and did one back here at WFAN in New York in the summertime before my senior year of college. And being someone who spent basically their entire life close to big cities, it did give me an opportunity to have those internships be kind of the entree to getting a job. So, everybody's got a different story about kind of how they, found their way into our business, if they do find their way into our business. And mine was basically not going to a school in any way known for its communications program, but going to a school that was in a city that afforded the opportunity then to do internships that became, how I got a job.
Right. And as you grew up as a sports fan, did you sit and watch these games and say, geez, I really want to be Marv Albert, or I want to be, any of the, the top echelon play-by-play guys?
Yeah. It's funny. When I was in high school, WFAN came on the air. And
Right.
so if you would have asked me in 1987, 1988, 1989, what would you want to do for a living? My thought would be, how great would it be to be a sports talk show host? And that's really what I was for my first 10, 15 years of being in the business. I mean, I was, someone that kind of went out and covered events, did pre and post game shows, but the lion's share of what I did was I did talk shows. And, I morphed into play by play a little bit more. Some of those opportunities, just the visibility of being on FAN gave me some local play by play opportunities. And I started to realize that, being at the game could be a lot more fun than being the guy back in the studio waiting for the game to be over to then talk about the game. I mean, we all get into this in the first place because we want to be at the game. And so, yeah, doing play-by-play has always been in my blood as well. But I mean, I could go back to doing talk shows. They're fun. What could be more fun sitting around talking sports with some of your buddies? And that's, it's kind of the DNA of what those shows are all about. So, when I was a kid, I didn't really necessarily have that singular focus. It was just I knew I wanted to be around sports, and I knew I was not nearly a good enough athlete to play them, at least not past high school. So, I had a pretty early idea that if I was going to be involved in sports, it was going to have to be as a broadcaster in one way, shape, or form. And, that's why, I mean, the second day my freshman year, I hadn't even turned 18 yet. When I was in college, I went straight to the student radio station and said, I want to do this. I want to be a part of your sports program here. And that, was kind of the jumping off point.
Right. How did you land the gig at FAN, and what year was it that you started there?
I was down in Miami right out of college for about 2.5, 3 years. And so it was literally as the calendar was turning from 95 to 96, I came back and was at FAN. I had been an intern. And the guy I was working for in Miami, we changed program directors. The new program director was not a particular fan of mine for whatever reason, subjective business. He didn't like me very much. And so I knew I needed to get out of there and was sending tapes all over the country. But, kind of constantly checking in with my old boss at FAN just as, a kind of a mentor role to say, hey, what do you think about this station? What do you think about that station? Hey, I've been nibble in Seattle. Somebody in Cleveland thinks they might be able to use me. And finally, after 2 or 3 phone calls of bouncing some of these thoughts off of him, he said, why don't you just come back here? And I said, well, I didn't even know that was a possibility. He said, yeah, I'll use you. I'll use you part-time. I mean, there are going to be weeks where I might have 2 shifts for you in 7 days. There might be weeks I've got 9 shifts for you in 7 days. But it should balance out to a decent living, live at home, just get started here. And within 6 months, I was full-time and had an apartment, So, I mean, it worked out fine, but it really was just kind of at his suggestion with me looking to him as the mentor to say, hey, I'm sending these tapes all over the country. What do you think about these different radio stations? Him saying, why are you going to go to Seattle or Cleveland? If you really want out of Miami, come back and work for me and I'll give you what I can. And it worked out, And so that was how I got back to New York, and I've never left.
All right. For those that are listening that might not know, but WFAN is one of the first, I guess, all sports talk shows in the country. Started in 1987 here in New York, and Bob, that's really where I first heard you doing some of those shows. And I had spent a lot of time in the car listening to WFAN before that. But what was it like to work at the top station for the particular category of a genre of radio?
It was great. It's kind of hard to explain what the atmosphere there was like, but it was very much felt like the epicenter of New York sports at the time. I mean, there were not a lot of other all sports radio stations around the country. The major markets had them, but it wasn't like there were 500 of them all over the country. And it was a very rare radio market that had 2 of them. Now it's almost standard operating procedure. You've got a couple of all sports radio stations in almost every market of the country. That's how popular the format has begun. But, I mean, you were very well aware that you were at the pinnacle of those stations. You were in the number 1 media market, and you were working for a very influential place. There was no doubt. It was not unusual for trades to get talked about on FAN, and then for the teams to go out and execute those trades or try, because they heard the fans screaming and yelling that these are the players they wanted, and they knew they could create good PR because fan was out there, taking the calls and kind of driving that narrative.
Someone on FAN takes credit for the Mike Piazza trade.
There's no doubt. I mean, I'll tell you, I don't think Mike Piazza would have been a Met 10 years earlier before FAN was created. I I mean, I think the momentum for a trade like that comes from the talk show hosts, and particularly Mike and the Mad Dog at the time, constantly pushing that button and egging the fans on, and the fans calling up and screaming, "I'm never going to a Met game again if they don't go out and get this guy." And and the thing that you definitely learn over the years, and I learned this at every other place I've been, is no matter how many times the people that run the game, run the teams, coach the teams, play for the teams, work for the teams, no matter how much they tell you, we don't read, we don't listen, they all read and they all listen. So they're hearing it. I mean, you know for a fact that they are hearing what the fans are saying. And you were acutely aware that it was a big deal to work there, at least back in the late 90s and early 2000s, kind of in the glory days of that station, when it was a behemoth with Imus in the morning and Mike and Chris in the afternoon, and the Mets were doing well. And it was an important place to work. It was definitely a place that, got you noticed as a young broadcaster, that helped me get to other places as well.
All right. And so what was the opportunity that presented itself that caused you to leave?
Well, the Jets changed hands as a radio property to Madison Square Garden. I think there was a thought back in like the mid 90s, 95, 96, somewhere in that area, that the Garden was going to buy a radio station, take the radio rights, which they owned, to the Yankees, pull the Rangers and Knicks off of FAN, which eventually they did do, and maybe get a football team as well and put another radio station on and maybe make it WMSG and go head-to-head with FAN. The Garden never actually buying a radio station materialized, but it did become the kind of quote-unquote MSG radio network, where MSG took the radio rights for the Yankees, combined them with the Knicks and Rangers, kind of took them in-house and moved them over to 1050, and also took the Jets. And I was affiliated with the Jets, and I was also being passed over for talk show host jobs at FAN. I thought I was going to eventually become like a regular day part guy on FAN, but the program director there also wasn't a particular fan of mine. So again, very subjective business. And I just realized, all right, the Jets are going to MSG. I'm getting more into play-by-play. Maybe that's where I should look for a job. And the guy at MSG, Mike McCarthy at the time, was very enthusiastic about hiring me. And he brought me over to do like a nightly highlight show on television, continue my affiliation with the Jets. And also I became one of the backup play-by-play guys for the Rangers, which was also, a thrill. So I would do 25, 30 Rangers games a year, then ended up doing some Knicks as well. So, that job kind of being a potpourri of different responsibilities, TV highlights, the Jet affiliation, Knicks and Rangers, mostly radio, some TV, but a decent amount of play-by-play. It just became, kind of that next stepping stone to move on. And you also want to show the guys at FAN that there are other places to work in town. I don't just have to sit here and have you pass me over for jobs and there are no other alternatives. I mean, there are other places to go. And so it worked out.
All right. So, one of the themes of the podcast here is, for folks to be able to take things back to their personal life or their business life. So, in your case, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you just laid out a game plan that says, geez, if you're, the opportunity is not presenting itself, although you might be emotionally, tied at your present, opportunity, there's the grass is always greener. There's other things out there.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, everybody in our business is always looking for bigger and better, and I mean, I shouldn't say everyone. I'm that way. Maybe it's a character flaw. I don't know, because I've never been like a smell the roses guy. I mean, I've definitely had people at different points in my career say to me, man, you should just enjoy the ride. Like, look around, look where you are. You're the radio voice of the Jets and you're at ESPN. And, yeah, all right, great. I'm at ESPN. But on college football, by anybody's kind of objective, not even subjective, but objective analysis, I'm probably the number 4, the number 5 guy on college football. No, that's not good enough. I want to be the number 3 guy and then the number 2 guy. And, I aspire to bigger and better. And if you feel like you've hit a roof somewhere where you can tell the decision makers don't think you're capable of bigger and better, don't really have any interest in giving you bigger or better, then yeah, I mean, I've always been one to then look outside to see if there's someplace else to go work or bigger and better is a possibility. And so, When I was at FAN and the midday show became available, and I went in and talked to one of my bosses there, and I was, I've done all these other shifts. I've been here for like 5.5 years. Am I at least going to get an audition for that show? He's like, no, you're not getting an audition. We already picked the show. This is who we think is right for it. And I was like, wow, I've been here for nearly 6 years. I don't even get an audition. He's like, yeah, I just don't think you're right for that. Okay, well, now that's all the signal that I need, that I'm not just not right for that. I'm not right for here, because if you're not going to consider me for that, you're certainly not going to consider me for bigger than that. So what am I doing? I mean, obviously, I feel like I've capped out. And every time I've gotten to a place where I felt like I've hit the ceiling and capped out, and there's no other alternative for me at that place, nowhere else to go, I've looked to move on.
Yeah, that's good. That's great advice. How do you prepare for a game? I've watched sports my entire life, and always enamored by the preparation of guys. And lesser to a degree when they're doing one game a week. But if you're doing Ranger games, or you're doing Knicks games, or a baseball game, how do guys like you prepare for, especially for somebody that's doing multiple sports at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always constantly preparing just by doing the fun part of watching the games. I mean, I watch college football, I watch the NFL, I watch the NBA, I watch baseball, I watch hockey, I watch because I'm a fan. So, in a way, I guess I'm preparing for when the Jets eventually play the Patriots, when I'm watching the Patriots play the Dolphins, and I'm preparing for the Jets to play the Dolphins when I'm watching the Dolphins play the Patriots. But I would watch that game anyway, because I'm a fan. So I guess there's just kind of a de facto preparation that goes into being a sports fan. But in terms of actually, the nuts and bolts of putting a chart together, it's a lot of what I call information condensation. It's just that the sports information departments for colleges, pro teams, whatever, they put together game notes, packages of newspaper articles. Back in the ancient days of DVDs, they used to send you DVD copies of like their last game or two, so you could pop that into your DVD player and watch it, become more familiar with the team that way. That's particularly helpful in football, because football is just, there's so many moving parts in football with so many different guys who can get in the game. That familiarity with the personnel can help. But that's basically it. I mean, I'm just doing a lot of reading, a lot of highlighting, and then taking the things that I think are important, that I think people might be interested in, that I could refer to during the game, and writing it down on a big spotter board with all the names and numbers that I've got in front of me when I'm calling the game. And then that's about it. I probably use 10, 15% of that. If it's a blowout, maybe 20 to 25% of what I write down. But, most of it is just a security blanket, because you're not going to get to it. If the game's good, you actually don't want to be bombarding the viewer or listener with tons of statistical details or filler material. I mean, let the game do the talking. But that's all it is. You're just you're trying to take a lot of the info that you get from them and whittle it down.
All right. Do you prepare any differently for a game that you're doing that's on TV versus one that's on the radio?
Yeah, TV is a lot more human interest story, big picture, conversation type topics that you prepare. Radio, it's really the nuts and bolts call the game. If I start to take the time to tell a whole bunch of personal human interest stories about the players, or throw, a whole boatload of statistics at you, the analyst would literally never get a chance to talk. Because when you're doing radio and it's football, I mean, before every play, you're setting the geography. Ball's on the left hash at the 30-yard line, 1st and 10 Jets. They've got a slot to the left, offset eye right, quarterback under center. Here's the score, play clock down to 5. I mean, I'm saying all of those things, and have to, because if you're listening on the radio, you need all that information. Well, if I then followed the play call up with, oh, and by the way, so-and-so's mom, invented the longer lasting light bulb, and here's the great story behind that. Well, the analyst, by the time I'm done with that, the next play starting, TV, I don't have to say any of that. I mean, when you turn on the TV now with the way we do graphics, if it's 3rd and 7 at the minus 30-yard line with 5 minutes to go before halftime, Team A's got 2 timeouts, they're, down 14-0. I mean, all of that information is on the screen. So what am I calling? I mean, I can supplement some of that information. A lot of times I like to give down and distance just to emphasize if it's a big play. If it's 3rd and 11, you'll say that to draw attention to the fact that, whoa, it's 3rd and 11. This could be a big play. But other than that, a lot of it is kind of weaving some of those human interest stories in about the players, or engaging the analyst, asking some questions, talking football, because I don't have to do all of that geography. So, the prep is deeper for TV because you're writing a lot more down, because a lot more of that has a chance to get on the air.
Yeah. It's funny when this week SNY was showing the 1969 World Series with the Mets and
I
the
was watching it.
Orioles,
Yep,
right?
I was watching it.
And my son Evan, who helped prep me for this interview with you, he and I were watching the game, and he's just a crazy sports guy. His ability to remember numbers and remember where he was when he was 8 years old, and and somebody hit a home run. We were on the bridge going from Brooklyn to Staten Island is just nuts. But we're watching the game. And he's like, where are the graphics? I mean, he knew that there were no
Right.
graphics then, but he's like, how do I know what's going on? And literally, and you remember those games, the only graphic they showed was, when a player came up, they showed, batting average and home runs and RBIs. They showed the score at the half inning. There was no pitch count. There was, it was nothing. So, the screen is obviously a lot different today than it was 50 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, even the things that we take for granted, like just the clock and the score being on the screen for like a basketball game or a hockey game. I mean, being a Nick Ranger fan, a lot of times they'll air, like even when you're watching The Last Dance, and they're showing all those
Yep.
Nick Bull highlights from the, I mean, this is the mid 90s. This isn't like the mid 70s or the mid 50s. I mean, it's the mid 90s. And the score and the clock weren't on the screen. You were counting on the play-by-play guy to remind you how much time was left. You were counting on the TV truck to like insert the clock and then take it back out from time to time. In the last minute of the game, they would shoot the clock and crop it and kind of stick it down in the corner of the screen so that you'd know when there's 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds of a close game. But if you just turned the game on back in those days, you didn't know what the score was or how much time was left until the TV crew put it on the screen or the announcer said it. And it's really not that long ago. I mean, we just kind of take all that information being on the screen now for granted, and the crawls along the bottom of the screen with the fantasy highlights going by. And I mean, all that, it's like Bloomberg television, and we're able to consume all that somehow. But yeah, all of the most basic graphics in the world that we take for granted on TV now, when we were growing up, we had none of that. I mean, I remember having my watch, like a little crappy Casio digital watch with a stopwatch feature on it. And the only two functions on the watch were the time of day, and then you could hit a button and it would turn into a stopwatch. And I would play with the stopwatch while I watched games because that would be my way of, if I would start the stopwatch and stop the stopwatch for whistles during like a Knick game on TV, I would be able to look at my watch and at least within, 10, 12 seconds or so, have an idea of how much time was left in a quarter or left in the half, because all that stuff wasn't on the screen.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing 10 years older, maybe a little bit less than you. And, it was normal for me to call sports phone and get scores. I would pull over this
976-1313.
Absolutely. I'd pull over the side of the road, and of course I didn't want to wait until WINS came on with, their 15 minutes and 45 minutes after the hour sports report. It was whoever it was, John Montone or somebody was doing sports reports. So yeah, it certainly has changed quite a bit. You mentioned the comment about fantasy sports, and that was something I wanted to talk about. As a play-by-play, individual, and you work for ESPN as part of your job, is there conversation around talking about fantasy and gambling on the sportscast? Are they asking you not to talk about it? Do you ignore something that's so prevalent? How do you think about it?
It's actually changed in the last year or two, just with the proliferation of legal sports betting in about 2/3 of our states now. You can bet legally on games. So yeah, I mean, now it's not nearly as taboo as it used to be. I mean, the NFL and some of these leagues, they're actually entering into business partnerships with gambling entities now, whereas 5 years ago they still talked about that as if that was like the third rail, like don't go near that, we don't talk gambling. Fantasy less so. I mean, because no, you'll definitely give the statistics for players, because that there are people out there that must have them on their fantasy team and then are interested. but I don't talk specifically about, so-and-so's, you know, got however many catches for yards, and this is what it'll equate to in fantasy points. But I mean, if you got a team that's like a 12-point underdog and it's a 10-point game with 5 minutes to go, the outcome might basically be determined, but there's still a segment of the audience out there that's very interested in what might happen over the next 5 minutes, not for who might win the game. That might be a foregone conclusion, but what the final score is going to be, you better believe it. It's definitely much more acceptable to be in our chair now and talk about that kind of stuff as opposed to what it was, say, not even 5 or 6 years ago.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting because, I don't know too many people watching football games nowadays that, are not some way, vested in the outcome of, how many carries and all the fantasy statistics. So it's interesting.
The devil's in the details. You've probably heard that phrase time and time again in your professional life. Projects get started with great intentions, but you no longer have the time to pay attention to the little things that can make the difference between success and failure. At Details Interactive, you can discuss your business with a seasoned direct-to-consumer marketing executive who has helped launch and grow web businesses and integrate multi-channel marketing initiatives. Learn more at detailsinteractive.com.
Talk about, let's go back into to college basketball. So you're currently doing Big 12 basketball, right?
Basically, yeah. Monday nights during the season, I will almost always be assigned to the Big 12. There's like that big Monday package, and we're the second half of the doubleheader in the Big 12. But I work with Dick Vitale, generally speaking, on Saturdays, and he bounces from league to league based on the matchup that, kind of warrants him being there. So I will find out what game that I'm doing with him, sometimes a week or two out, sometimes longer, but, we could be in the SEC, we could be in the Big 12, we could be in the ACC. I mean, it's an odd week where we're not doing a game that doesn't somehow involve a Kansas, a Duke, a North Carolina, a Kentucky. Auburn's been a big team the last few years. I mean, usually one of those teams is somehow involved in the game.
Right. And so where I was going is you've had the opportunity to work in some great arenas.
Yes.
Is there a particular arena or two where you just say, geez, it's a great place to call a game?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to a lot of them that are great. I mean, great. Like the Big Ten, I did 5 or 6 years in the Big Ten on weekends. So I've been to Breslin at Michigan State, Assembly Hall at Indiana, Cole at Wisconsin. I mean, those are some great places to go to do games. And even over the past few years, there are some basketball atmospheres that have taken off at some places like Florida and Auburn, where, I mean, it's a madhouse. They're great places to go do games. But the two that really leap out, obviously, are Cameron for Duke and Allen Fieldhouse for Kansas. I mean, those are, if I was going to tell a college basketball fan, I want to go to one place or two places. Baseball fan, you're going to go to Fenway and you're going to go to Wrigley. I mean, I'm going to send you to those two places so you can go see them and see what the whole scene is all about. If I'm going to send a college basketball fan to a game, you want to go to a Duke game at Cameron, and you want to go see a Kansas game at Allen Fieldhouse.
All right. Do you feed off the crowd, while you're in,
Sure.
When they're right?
Sure. I mean, one of the biggest challenges I had transitioning from radio to TV is understanding how valuable it can be to lay out. When the crowd is going absolutely ballistic, there's no reason to talk. Just let the crowd go ballistic and let the players play, and then punctuate it at the end of whatever happens, if need be. But, laying out and letting the crowd be the crowd, to me, I mean, when I'm watching at home, that's one of the best parts of, those big moments in games.
Right. So, college sports has so many interesting issues. One of them, which, seems to crop up every year is the concept of paying student athletes and doing it, within, some guidelines from the NCAA. Do you have a point of view?
Well, I mean, now that they've legalized, generally speaking, the name and likeness exception, that's going to be legalized cheating. I mean, it's something that's always been there. I mean, it's not, you talk to coaches and players and you watch any of these 30 for 30s, watch the Eric Dickerson 30 for 30, where, Texas A&M delivered him a gold Trans Am in his driveway and everyone called it the Trans A&M. I mean, the worst kept secret in the world back in the days of the 70s, 80s, early 90s was that these guys were getting definitely the $100 handshake is not a new thing in college sports. But now that they're allowing them to be able to be paid for their name and likeness, I'm going to wonder what is going to prevent a booster from a particular program to say to the three best recruits in whatever sport it might be, football, basketball, whatever, hey, three best recruits, how about I pay each of you $500,000 to appear on my billboard for my car dealership that I just bought that's 5 miles out of town. And maybe he's going to sell $100,000 worth of cars for his $1.5 million billboard. But what does he care? This is just a legalized way of letting that booster give these kids money that he was always looking for ways to give them anyway, because they're tied in with these programs. They want these kids to come to their schools. So, I don't think it changes a whole lot outside of just changing the way, in some cases, that it's done.
Yeah, definitely something that's interesting to watch to see how it continues to evolve. You talked earlier about, wanting to, always strive for, something bigger and better. So what is bigger and better for you? Do you aspire to do TV for football, for example?
Sure. I think the NFL on television is probably the pinnacle of our business from a play-by-play standpoint. But if I'm number 4 on college football, someday I'd like to be number 1 and call the college football, the national championship game. I would love to call a Super Bowl on television. I don't think Jim Nantz and Joe Buck are going anywhere anytime soon. But, to me, as long as you are, once I stop striving to try to get promoted, to do bigger, to do better, then I don't know. I feel like I'm stopping what my kind of internal motivation is to do a really good job. And maybe I'll feel differently 10 years from now. I'm 48, going on 49 years old. Maybe when you're 58, 59 years old, and you're a few years away from potentially being able to call it quits or pare down or maybe pick your schedule, do a little bit more of what you want to do, I'll feel differently at that point. But right now, I'm still every bit as determined to try and climb the ladder as I always was.
Right. And as you refine, your craft, you want to move up. And so I imagine wanting to move up means getting better, however that's measured. Are there people that you watch and say, there's, you don't have to give names if you don't want to, but are there people that you watch out there in the way they deliver the information that, you say, geez, I need to follow that person, more specifically?
Yeah, I've always tried to guard against imitating.
Mm.
I'm to me, if once you start imitating someone else's style, you've lost yourself. I'm going to call the game the way I call the game. And that's just going to be the way I do it. Now, there are definitely influences that you can have. You can hear how other guys call games, some phrases they use, some of the things they might concentrate on. When I was first doing baseball, and we were talking to Gary Cullen, and I think Gary's about as good as you can get at calling a baseball game. And on top of that, there's a whole generation of Met fans that are growing up knowing Gary is the TV voice of the team. But for those of us that remember Gary when he was doing the radio, I think he was better at radio than he is at TV. And I think TV-wise, he's as good as anybody in the country. That's how good he was at radio. And listening to him, just sequentially put a call together, because there's a lot that can happen in baseball. You get runners on first and second and someone rips a ball down the right field line. Now, in what order are you going to tell me what's happening? The ball's fair down the right field line. The runners are scoring. The right fielder is going over to scoop the ball up. The cutoff man is getting in position. Here comes the throw. Here come the guys around the bases. So-and-so scores. There's a rhythm to baseball where, unless you've done a million innings, it's not something you can kind of just do without thinking about it. And so I would listen to some of the guys that were really good at baseball, trying to pick up kind of sequentially what they would concentrate on in a call. I've picked up with some football announcers the fact that, again, being a radio guy, radio in my DNA, I used to call when I first started doing television. I thought I needed to identify every tackler. You don't. A guy goes up the middle for a 3-yard gain. It's okay to say so-and-so up the middle for 3. And then just get out and let your analyst talk. I learned that by watching guys do television and recognizing that when I'm watching a game on TV, if they don't give me the tackler every single time, I'm not missing it as a viewer. So why do I feel the need to do it as a game caller? So just things like that I've picked up over the years. But I don't think, like, I'm not going to go on the air and try to sound like Marv Albert. To me, that would be contrived. I don't sound like him. I don't call a game like him, nor should I try to. And I don't expect some 20-year-old that's listening to me on the radio that they should try to call a game like me. They shouldn't. They should do it the way they do it. Call the game the way you call the game. And if someone doesn't like it, well, then tell them to take a long walk off a short pier, because you're going to call the game the way you call the game, and that's that.
All right. So we're winding down towards the end, but I have a couple more questions. What's your sense of, the kind of the newer platforms that are out there that are trying to become participants in streaming sports? YouTube, you see games, now you see some Facebook games. What's your sense of that? Is there real value in being able to stream games there? Will people consume it that way?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just the natural evolution of the technology that where we're going. Like, how many people are cutting cords? How many people are finding different ways? The numbers that ESPN tells us about, where you're getting viewership in the hundreds of thousands on phones, on the app for games that you're calling. Now you're still getting viewership sometimes in the millions for football games on over the air on the television, but there are definitely big chunks of the audience now that are out and about or somewhere in their house choosing to watch the game on a device. And as the devices get better and higher quality and bigger, easier to operate, even more portable, I mean, it's only natural that you would think that the evolution of the business would be more in that direction. But I don't see, at least in my career of calling games, I don't think that's going to radically change how we do our jobs. Whether I'm calling a game for MSG in New York, on the radio for 98.7 for the Jets, on ESPN or on Facebook, they're still hiring me to be there to call the game, add to it, supplement it, and hopefully add something that someone at home can't see on their own or can't necessarily appreciate. So, to me, that's just the vehicle with which the games are delivered. I don't know that changes a whole lot about how we do our jobs to broadcast the games themselves. It's just a different way for someone to consume them.
Right. And, you mentioned this earlier about, getting into sports. So many people want to do it. It's like anything else, somewhat limited and not easy. But what would you tell somebody that, is a sports fan, they want to get into whether it be sports announcing or in some other aspects of the sports industry? What guidance do you give people like that?
It's start as early as you can, as young as you can. And when I say young, I mean, college. I'm not saying drop out of school. I mean, you want to go to college, you want to finish your college degree, be a communications major, be a broadcasting major if necessary. While you're in college, certainly your junior and senior year, you want to do internships if you can. I mean, to me, that's the jumping off point to really learning how to do what we do, and also making the connection so that when you get out of school, you've got someone to call to say, hey, if you don't have a job for me, hopefully you know someone that does. That's how I got my first job, was through the internships that I did. And then just never say no. I mean, just understand, you're not going to get paid much of anything. You're going to be working holidays, nights, and weekends, and you could potentially end up anywhere in the country. And if any of those three things that you're like, oh, I like my weekends, I like my holidays, I like being around my friends, I got a buddy that's going to go work for, an accounting firm. He's going to make 125 right out of college. These people are paying me 30. I don't think I can do that. Then you're right. Then you can't do it, because there are 50 people lined up behind you that are going to be willing to go probably for even less money than that to get their foot in the door. And that's really what it's about. Just don't say no. Get your foot in the door somewhere. Just get a job, any job, somewhere. And then once you're in the building around the decision makers, you might find your way on the air. You might find an off-air job that appeals to you even more. But it's just about getting your first foot in the door in the industry, and then just being a really hard worker. And just don't say no. You're always available, whatever they need. And hopefully at some point, if you appreciate the effort that I'm, giving you, boss, here's what I would really like a chance to do. If there's ever an opportunity to get a weekend show or do some updates or go cover a game, something like that. If you're around and you work hard and you do a good job, it's amazing how magically those opportunities somehow present themselves to you once you're there.
Yeah, it's like any other industry. You just have to, keep working at it. So this is all the time we have, Bob. This was really interesting. I could probably have spent another hour asking you questions, but I know you're busy, and I've taken a lot of your time. Really good information. It's great to hear your voice, and again, thank you very much for doing this with me.
No problem, Mark. Good to talk to you.
All right, stay well, buddy.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Bob Wischusen for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, Bob's success was helped tremendously by the internships that he had. Be aggressive in searching and finding something that puts you in position for your career aspirations. If you're in college, having one as a rising sophomore is not too early. And if you're in a position to create an internship for a college student, please do so. Number 2, strive to get better. There's nothing wrong with aspiring to be bigger and better. If you cannot find that path in your current role, do not be afraid to look outside and find other opportunities. And number 3, know when to speak and when to listen. Bob explained what it's like as an announcer doing a game and hearing the crowd go wild. He's figured out that the crowd is telling the story, and he doesn't need to add his commentary. We can all do better by being better listeners with our colleagues. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter @DetailsInteract and learn more at detailsinteractive.com. Until next time, the devil is in the details.